friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Sunny Studios Savannah Safari, Fabulous Flamingos, Party Pups, and Tropical Scenes. So I've stamped those images out on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match some pattern paper from the Simple Stories Boho Baby collection. So I'll tear out the sheet that I want to use as my color palette inspiration and tuck that under my cardstock panel. I'm going to start with my giraffe, and for the main part of the body I'm going to use Y13, Y15, and Y26. That Y26 has a little bit of a brownish undertone to it that's going to help mute those yellows just a bit and help it match the yellows that are in that pattern paper a little bit more. So I'm going to lay in my shadows first with that, and then I'll start to blend that out with the Y15, which is going to help brighten that up a bit. I'll just go right along the edge of that Y26, fill in the back legs, and pull that color out a little bit further. And then I'll fill in with the Y13. And I'm going to color right over the spots on the back because I'm going to color them with a dark brown anyway, which they will definitely cover up the yellow, and it just makes it so much easier than trying to color around them. And then while I have these shades out, I also want to do any other elements that I want to be yellow. So I'm going to do the toucan's beak next. And I did color in his feet as well with the Y15. I forgot to do that on screen. They're super tiny, but I did that when I was die cutting them out. So I am also going to do the main part of my lion's body with this combo. I'm being a little bit more heavy-handed with that Y26 just to make him a little bit darker and more golden to kind of differentiate him a little bit more from the giraffe. And then again, I'll blend out with that Y15 and just save a little bit of room in the center of his face and on his front legs for that highlight with the Y13. I also filled out his front toes with that. I'm going to do the flames on the candles with the Y15, and then I'm also going to add a yellow stripe to my birthday hats. So I'm just going to pick one that I want to be yellow, and I'll start again with that darkest shade and then blend from the bottom left toward the top right, going lighter and lighter. Then I'm going to move on to some browns, and you can see from that pattern paper that the brown is kind of more of a reddish brown. So I went with E13, E15, and E17. And I'm going to do the muzzle of my giraffe, his little ossicones, which are the little horn type things on top of a giraffe's head, and his mane and tail. So E17 first, blend it out with the E15, and then I'll fill in with the E13. And I'm also going to do the lion's mane and tail with this combo as well. I decided not to do the spots on the back because I knew I wanted to go a little bit darker for those. So I'm just going to move on with this combo for now. So for his mane, I'm just placing that E17 on the outside edges and blending in toward his face. For his tail, I'm just adding it to the top where it's connected to the rest of his tail, and then I'll have the highlight down at the tip. So blending out with the E15 and then using the E13. Although I decided at this point that I didn't really like that. I felt like it just was a little bit too soft. So I'm going to come back in and add a little bit of depth to that. So I brought in E18 and I added a touch of that to the mane. I'm also going to add it to any of the spots that are along the very back in the shaded areas of the giraffe. Those I filled in with the E18. The ones that were a little bit more forward, I am going to blend out with the other shades. And then I also decided to add some of that E18 into the lion's mane and his tail and start coloring in the base of my palm tree trunk. Then I'll take the E17 and add a little bit of that to the mane, fill in the rest of those spots. I realized I forgot to add a little E18 to the tail, so I did that and blended it out. And now I'm going to blend out the lion as well, and I liked that a lot better. It just seemed to fit more with the golden yellows and help those stand out. Otherwise, it was just a little bit too reddish for me. So I'm going to continue blending that out with that second layer on the lion's mane and his tail, and then I'll fill in the palm tree trunk as well. Next, I wanted to do my blacks, and I'm trying to match the background of that pattern paper. So I went with a warm gray. I went with W5, W7, and W9, and I filled in the hooves of my giraffe, which were super, super tiny. And then I also added that to the lion's nose, and I'm going to do the main body of my toucan. So for the lion's nose and the toucan, I used all three shades, starting with the W9, blending out with the W7, and then using the W5 for the highlight. And then I'm going to do anything that I want to be white with E40, E41, and E42. So I'm going to do the rest of the toucan's body, the part that's on his belly and face. I'm also going to do the bones that are tied around the birthday cake. So that actually came with the Party Pups stamp set, so they're meant to be dog bones, but I thought that those worked really well for a lion as well, since he's also a carnivore. So yeah, I'm just starting with the E42 on all of those, adding a bit of shading to the right side, blending out with the E41, and then I'll use the E40 for the lightest. And I did leave a little bit of white cardstock showing on those as well, just so they still looked nice and bright. And then I'm going to do 2 more stripes on my party hats. I'll do the ones on either side of the yellow stripe. And again, I left a little bit of white cardstock. And then I'm going to color in my candles, so that will fill in the white stripes, and then I can add the details with my next shade, which is going to be B00, B91, and B93, trying to match the really pale kind of grayish blue in that pattern paper. So I'm using the B93 for my darkest, adding a little bit of that to the party hats, the bottom stripe, and the pom-pom on top. And then I'm also going to do the ribbon that is tying the bones to the cake, and I'll do every other stripe on my candles. For a second there, I considered doing my candles in different shades, but I decided to just do them all blue. And for the bow, I just left the highlight on the parts that I thought would catch the most light, which is the edges of the folded part of the ribbon and then the front of the part that's wrapped around. And then I'm going to bring in a little bit of pink. There is some pink in that pattern paper. It's very pale, but I just wanted to add some rosy cheeks, especially to my critters. So I'm using RV10, RV11, and RV13 for that. Just blending that out. I don't want it to be crazy bright, but I definitely wanted it to show up and just liven up my critters. I also added some pink in the top stripe of the party hat, which is super small, so you don't see too much of it. And I'm going to do the frosting on my cake, but for that I only used the RV11 and the RV10, and then I brought in RV00 to finish that off, and also left a little bit of white cardstock showing because I wanted it super pale since this is more of a masculine card. Then for my greens, the greens were a bit tricky. They gave me the most trouble to try to match up because the green in that pattern paper is so light. But I ended up going with BG90, BG93, and BG96. The BG96 is kind of dark, but once you blend it out with the other two shades, it does soften it quite a bit. And I wanted to have two different shades of green since I have so many leaves, so I just went with combos that really softened quite a bit when you added the lightest shades to them. So I am going to do this combo for a few of these leaves, trying not to add too much of that BG96, but I definitely need a little bit of that in there so that the coloring looks dynamic. Otherwise, I feel like it'll just be too pale. So I added a little bit of that to the center of the leaves that I did with that combo, and then blended out toward the tips with the lightest shades. I'm also going to do these 3 tiny leaves in this combo. Again, just adding that darkest down the center and then blending out on either side of that with the BG93 and then the BG90. And then I'm going to switch to a different green combo. This one's going to be a little bit cooler to kind of tie in some of the cooler tones in the coloring. This card has quite a mix of warm and cooler tones. So I wanted to balance that out as well with the greenery. And I used G00, YG41, and YG45. And again, it's just a super pale combo, especially once you add in that G00. And it just adds a little bit of brightness in the center with that YG45. So I'm going to fill in all of the rest of the leaves, again placing my darkest down the center where the line is drawn there, just to indicate, you know, that it's kind of like a little bit concave, so it would be more shadowed. And then the tips, which are a little bit thinner and more stretched into the light, are going to be where the highlight would be. And then once I have all of those filled in, I'll also do this kind of fern-like plant in the same combo. I didn't want to use too many different greens, especially since the green in that pattern paper is so pale already. So once I finish up this last leaf, I am going to trim all of these images out with their coordinating dies. For my background, I'm starting with a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock, and I've got some water off to my side and an acrylic block. I'm going to take the largest die in the Sunny Studio Stitched Arch die set and just lay that on my paper as a guide, and I'm going to paint a quick and easy watercolor background. I'm going to start with some cracked pistachio, which is going to tie into that last green combo that I used, and I'm going to mix that with some forest moss, which is going to tie in to the other green combo. And I'm going to mix these two together a little bit and then also use them on their own and kind of just paint in a background. I want it to be really loose and organic, very flowy. I don't want there to be like just a solid batch of color. I want there to be areas that are lighter, areas that are darker, areas that have some little spots in them. And so I'm just going to continue painting those in until I like the look of it. I felt like I wanted a little bit more of the brightness of the cracked pistachio, but it had gotten all mixed up, so I'm going to clean off the top of my block and just add a little bit of that on there again so that I can bring some of that down into the bottom area especially and kind of soften up that forest moss and also add it to the top. And I'll just keep layering that until I like the look of it, adding a little bit more of the ink and adding a little bit more water, kind of lightening up areas and darkening up some. I wanted it to be darker down toward the bottom just to give it a little bit more of a grounding effect, and then a little bit softer toward the top. Once I'm happy with it, I will set this aside to dry. And I'll go back to my pattern paper pad. I wanted to choose another contrasting print to use with the star print that I had already chosen. So I was just flipping through, and then I decided to go through the scraps that I had tucked in the front, and I found this brown gingham print that I thought went really well with it. So I'm going to trim these two pieces down with my paper trimmer. Then I'll take my Barely Art Precision Craft Glue and take that gingham piece and glue that across the front. Make sure that's lined up nice and straight. And then I'll go back to that stitched arch die, and I'm going to line that up in the center of the panel and tape that down into place with a little bit of Post-it tape. I'll run that through my die cutting machine and trim out a little window. So once I've done that, what I'm left with is two pieces actually. I can save this centerpiece for another project, but for today I'm only using the outer portion. Now that my background has dried, I'm going to pop that into my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using the It's Your Birthday from the Party Pups stamp set, stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'll stamp that down twice to make sure it's nice and bold, and then I'll set this panel aside to dry. Again, that ink does take a little bit to dry. And then I'll pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using Lawn Fawn Sage Leaf cardstock and the matching ink. And I'm taking the image and the sentiment from the Savannah Safari stamp set. So I spelled out "Hope Your Day is Wild" and stamped the zebra. And I did that a couple of times since this ink does dry back a little bit, just so it would be nice and legible. And then I'm going to adhere the background piece to the card front. So I'll just add some liquid glue along the back of that. I'm going to use more glue than I typically would just because I did watercolor on it, so it was a little bit warped, and I want to make sure that that really lays flat on the card base. Then I can bring in my images and also the frame, which I have added some Scotch 3M foam tape to the back of. So I will peel off all of those release papers, and then I'm going to line that up over top of the card and make sure that is centered, and then pop that down into place. So I'm ready to start adhering my images, and I'm going to begin with this palm tree because that's going to go in the back of the scene. And I'm going to stick it up pretty high because I want it to look taller than it actually is. I'll cover up the bottom part in a little bit with some other leaves. And then I'm going to place the lion a little bit higher as well because I want him to be behind the birthday cake. And then to his left, I'm going to add the giraffe. And I should have laid out my images before I started gluing them down like I normally do, but I was in a little bit of a rush. My husband needed my son and I to go pick his car up from the garage after it was inspected, and I had to get there before they closed, and so I was kind of rushing a little bit. So I did have to pull things up and readjust a little bit here and there, but it ended up working out, thank goodness. I didn't end up tearing anything or, messing anything up too bad, but I did have to slide the lion over a bit and then up a bit to make room for the giraffe and then the birthday cake, and then I also wanted to pull his tail forward in front of the leaf that I added on the right to kind of push that back further in the scene. And then I also added in the smaller leaves, but I popped those up on some foam tape. The birthday cake is also popped up on foam tape, and so is the toucan. And then I wanted to take the rest of these leaves and kind of have them coming in from the sides and really make that look like a nice full jungle scene. I did have to trim off some of the ends a little bit and just get them a little bit more flush since the frame was already added with the foam tape, and so I couldn't tuck them in any further. And the leaves that I have coming in from the very top, I'm going to pop up with foam tape as well. So I'm going to add that smaller leaf in the center, And then I'll trim down this last leaf quite a bit to make it fit because I didn't want to cover up too much of the giraffe's head. So I trimmed it down, but it was still covering up too much, so took that down a little bit farther, and then the foam tape that I had added didn't quite fit, so I had to peel that up and tear off a smaller piece and then just tuck that under the side. So it covers up the giraffe just a tiny bit, but you can still see him clearly. Then I just needed to add the party hats, and for the first one I had to pop it up on a little bit of foam tape because it was going for the toucan, which is also popped up. And then the giraffe, I just had to kind of slip back behind those leaves so I could add it to his head. And then the lion I'll also glue flat since he's flat on the card. And I just had to decide which direction I kind of wanted that to point. I didn't want it to cover up the giraffe's muzzle, so I went to the right. And then I decided to add just a sprinkle of clear sequin. So I'm adding 3 to the top, 1 on top of the pattern paper, and then 2 on that background. And same at the bottom. I'll have 2 on the background and 1 on top of the pattern paper. I have 2 small and 1 larger in each corner. I'm going to let those dry for a few seconds, and then I'll grab some Stardust stickles and just fill in the center of those to add a little bit of sparkle. And I'll also add some sparkle to just a couple of my images. Since this is more of a masculine card, I don't want to go crazy, but I added it to the party hats and the pom-poms and the lights on the candles and the ribbon around the birthday cake. And that is going to finish up this card, so I'll lift that up so you can see all of the detail and give you another peek at the inside. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give the video a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted when I post new videos. The products I use will be listed and linked in the description bar below, and if you'd like to keep watching, here are 2 extra videos I thought you might also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye!